Well, thank you for coming back to our wonderful event today, folks. I really, really appreciate you coming. And we are really, really fortunate to have an amazing speaker today. And she is the author of the Monsanto Papers. And she's been at this for about 25 years. She's been a writer, investigative journalist. She wrote a book called Whitewash, which was the 2018 Outstanding Book of the Year. She's basically an expert on the environmental impacts of the American food system. And she is all about uncovering the corruption in science and corporate America. She's been asked to speak all over the country. You even spoke to the European Union, right? Testified to the European Union.
So Parliament, yes, in Brussels, yes.
Yes, in Brussels. So that must have been exciting. But she knows what she's doing. She really understands the food production industry, and she's done a fantastic job in writing this book, The Monsanto Papers, about the lawsuit, which ended up costing Bayer $11 billion, right?
That's the amount they've said they're going to pay to settle the Roundup cancer litigation, $11 billion.
Wow, that's amazing. So tell us how this all happened and how it all came about, and the attorneys and everything. There's so many aspects. It does read like a Grisham thriller. You know, I haven't read the whole book yet, but it's been hard to put down. I just got it a couple of days ago. But
a lot of people have said that, which you know, is great, because that was what I was hoping, was that it would. My first book, Whitewash, that you mentioned, was successful and did, you know, get me invited to speak to the European Parliament and you know, the Forum for Democracy in France, and really all around the world. I've spoken in many countries. It was more of an academic book, I think. A lot of universities have picked it up for their environmental health programs, but that book really looked at the harmful impacts of the chemical glyphosate, which is the main ingredient, of course, in Roundup, and the evidence that I'd obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests and other information that showed how the company had tried to hide the risks of glyphosate, particularly the risks tied to cancer. And in the larger context of what pesticides and agrochemicals are doing in terms of harming biodiversity, environmental health, and human health in a bigger picture. So that book was great, but again, it was a little nerdy, you know.
Right.
And so when the situation became, you know, mired in litigation, this mass tort litigation that resulted in about 100,000 plaintiffs around the United States suing Monsanto, claiming Roundup exposure caused them to develop non-Hodgkin lymphoma, I wanted to do another book, but I wanted this one to be, you know, much more reader friendly, to appeal to a general audience, because this is really a human story. There are people getting cancer, and people who are dying, and people who are developing this cancer. The evidence has shown due to their exposure to glyphosate-based herbicides. Now, of course, there are a lot of different substances and compounds and chemicals that contribute to cancer in our world. And we have, you know, 600,000 people a year who die from cancer just in the United States. And that is for a whole variety of reasons. Right. But I'm hoping that people will understand that this story, which is a story of one man, Lee Johnson, his diagnosis of non-Hodgkin lymphoma, terminal non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and his fight to hold Monsanto accountable, because he believed and his lawyers believed there was evidence to show that his exposure caused his cancer. I'm hoping that that one man story will resonate and help people appreciate the risks that we all face in our environment from, you know, a range of chemicals and threats.
Right, right. And, you know, it's such an epic battle when you get into something like this, because there's so many things that they can say caused this other than, you know, the Roundup Ready, and how do you prove that it was the Roundup Ready that got him. But in his case, it was pretty clear because of the accident where he was actually completely doused with the Roundup Ready, and then, you know, just a few months later.
Yeah, Lee Johnson had a very extraordinary exposure to these chemicals. He was a groundskeeper in Benicia, California, and was his job was to spray a lot of the glyphosate herbicides sold by Monsanto, developed by Monsanto, and around the school grounds. And one day, with a large tank sprayer malfunctioned, and he had to basically dive into the middle of a fountain of the chemical, and did become doused. And it was not very long after that that his skin started to erupt in
Right,
lesions and become diseased. And
right.
over time, he was diagnosed with this terminal form of non-Hodgkin lymphoma that manifests on the skin.
And he seems like such a nice man too. And he lifted himself up out of poverty, and he had a family, and he was really, a good guy. And that actually happened, as I understand from what I read, that accident actually happened because he was trying to save all the kids that swim downstream from all of this fluid going into the system, into the sewage system that would go right down into the lake, right? Or the drainage system.
Yeah, his first thought, as he explained it to me, was, oh my gosh, I can't let it get into the water,
Yeah,
because it was very near a public waterway, and the chemical was rolling downhill. He was on a hill, and
right,
so that was his first thought, was to try to
right,
stop the flow and dam it up, get dirt and pile it up wherever he could. And so he didn't even go home and shower right away. He, finished out his work throughout the day, and then that night went home. And then he had a second accident where a backpack sprayer with the chemical leaked down his back. But so his exposure is different, I suppose, to other users. But the science shows that chronic exposure over the long term does cause non-Hodgkin lymphoma as well. So his case was a bit unique, but it was the first to go to trial
right,
against Monsanto because he was not expected to live very long.
right, right. Wow. So you've got a lot of agricultural workers, and that's what probably most of your cases are. Agricultural workers or people that are using it as a pesticides for schools and things like what Lee was doing, right?
There's a lot of, yeah, I mean, among the plaintiffs, surprisingly, you have a lot of just residential users. You
Yeah.
also do have groundskeepers and golf course, maintenance people and that sort of thing. But it's the consumers, it's the folks spraying it, or the groundskeepers, but consumers who really, aren't trained in pesticide application, and sort of they see advertisements for Roundup products, where people are out in flip-flops and shorts and spraying it, and they're not wearing gloves or long pants. And, you're told it's so safe, safe for people and pets. And, but internally, what we know is that Monsanto had a really different message for its own people who spray the product. They should wear, protective gloves and long pants and long sleeves, and really protect themselves from any type of dermal or inhalation exposure to this chemical. So
Yeah.
there's a whole range of contradictory and deceptive
Right.
information that's come out about this chemical that Monsanto really tried to hide for so many years.
Well, that's the glaring thing, isn't it? Is the way that they try to repress the truth about their product and really go overboard to claim that this was the product that was more safe than any of the other products. And that's how they sold it. They sold it as, oh, this is a safe product. You don't have to worry about this product because it's the safe one. And that's what they kept claiming, even though they knew that it wasn't true, right?
Yeah, and there's so much that goes into that, because there are other chemicals. So there's a weed killer called paraquat. Paraquat is so acutely deadly that it carries a skull and crossbones on the label, and the EPA says that one sip can kill. Has a whole website, one sip can kill, about paraquat. So, if you compare glyphosate weed killers to paraquat weed killers, if you take a sip of glyphosate, you're not going to die in 7 days. If you take a sip of, paraquat, you probably are going to die in 7 days.
Mhm.
So, yes, it's safer than that weed killer. Chronically over long-term usage, if you do not protect yourself, if you have, large repeated exposures, it's drifting onto your skin, you're inhaling it, anything like that, a lot of science shows that you can be subject to cancer or other health problems.
Right. Well, let's get into the attorneys, because in like any good Grisham novel, you have these attorneys that are real characters, and there were several that were involved in this case that you talk about in the book that are very interesting characters. So tell us a little bit about the cast of characters that were involved in this litigation.
Yeah, I mean, this is what was, really compelled me to write the book, was Lee's story, but also the story of these lawyers, because I had never really seen how the sausage is made, if that's the right term,
Right. In these
how
cases,
you put a case like this together. And I was fortunate enough to be able to sort of be a fly on a wall in a lot of things that were going on, and to observe closely how these lawyers worked. And you've got a good old Southern guy from Virginia,
right,
who's been doing this forever. You got a wet behind the ears, almost brand new young guy from California.
right.
You've got a hard charging dynamic Midwesterner, take no prisoners woman living in Colorado, and
Right.
and a few others. And they come together, this really
Right.
eclectic group, and just the tactics and the strategies that they employed. They'd never gone up against Monsanto. They'd never tried a pesticide case. But the way they maneuvered was so fascinating to me. And I really wanted the drama to come through in this story. And I hope that it does.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's pretty cool the way that they had what was Mike was the name of the attorney that owned the firm, right?
Mike Miller, yes.
Yeah. And so the way he put the people together, like he had one guy that really wasn't a very good lawyer, but he was an incredible investigator, right? And he could dig deep and find out what needed to be done and get all that done. So he had that skill. And then the guy you mentioned from California, he was an actor, and he was like an orator. And so he did a fantastic job with the jury and talking in court and in the courtroom. So you had all these different characters that it took. It took a team of people with highly skilled in certain areas to pull it off. It sounds like, but
yeah, it really did. And the things that they have to go through, and the maneuvering with the court, and the different laws and regulations for what type of evidence can be presented or not presented, and witnesses and who can testify. I think a lot of people, I know myself, I guess I believed this. I sort of just thought, when you have a case like this, both sides put together their evidence and present it to the jury, and let the jury decide. And of course, that's not the way it works necessarily. There are a lot of checks and balances and hurdles that you have to overcome for almost each piece of evidence that the jury is going to see. And how you get to that evidence that the jury is going to see is really dependent on strategy. And
yeah, and I think there's some aspect of luck involved in these things too, because there's certain things that can happen that could just kill a case. And that's one of the main things I think that comes across, is that in terms of these people look at these lawyers and these law firms as money grubbing, and so, and there's that aspect to them. They want to make a lot of money, and they do make a lot of money when they win. But if they lose, they can be destroyed by losing a case like this, because it costs them so much money to get there, right?
Right. They had to, I mean, some of them leveraged, their homes, mortgaged their homes, leveraged their assets. It was millions of dollars that they had to spend before the first case ever went to trial. And of course, yes, if they had lost, they would not recoup a penny, because the plaintiffs do not pay them. They only get paid if they win at trial.
Yeah.
So, it was.
So they're entrepreneurs, really. I mean, it's like an entrepreneurial thing, and I've been there myself many times. And if they would have lost that case, they would have all probably had to declare bankruptcy.
Well, I don't know. Some of them are pretty wealthy, but
but
yeah.
Especially the younger ones.
Yeah, I mean, they really did sort of put a lot on the line. There were a lot of law firms and lawyers that decided to skip the Roundup litigation. and and the twists and the turns that happened in the case. You had one lawyer who, his marriage is falling apart and he looks to be dependent on drugs and he's struggling with addiction and he's not showing up for meetings. And, he eventually, suffers some health issues. And then another lawyer, the lead lawyer, has a tragic accident just on the eve of trial, and is near death. I mean, so many just crazy things that you think this has to be a movie. I mean, that's when I was watching and reporting all this, I kept thinking this has to be a movie. And of course, I don't know how to make a movie, but I know how to write a book. So that's how the book was born.
Oh, this is definitely going to be a movie. And I think it's going to be a blockbuster of a book because everybody knows about Monsanto. We knew about Monsanto, when I had a lot of friends. I didn't have to go to Vietnam, but I was there in college in the late '60s. I was a lottery guy. I was able to stay out because of the lottery. But I had so many friends that died, were injured. Some of them were injured by Agent Orange.
Right.
And that was a Monsanto product.
Yeah.
And so we've known about them, in my generation for 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people do, but I hope that even people, if they've never even heard of Monsanto, and even if they don't care about Roundup or glyphosate or cancer, maybe you just find this a really interesting book about the way our legal system works and the lengths that some really crazy, eclectic, aggressive attorneys go to try to hold companies accountable when they think that they're doing wrong, by the public, because that's what really motivated this team of lawyers. And that's why they put millions of dollars out there. In large part was because they wanted to hold Monsanto accountable for what they believed, was a lot of suffering and a lot of death by a lot of people.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that they were able to do that and expose it, because living in Iowa for 35 years, I've seen, so much, in our air and our water and all that Roundup goes in the water, it goes in the air, it affects everybody, and it goes down the rivers into the Mississippi and out into the Gulf. And, look at the problems they're having in the Gulf now. And a lot of that is these pesticides and chemicals coming from the Midwest down the Mississippi into the Gulf. And you see these horrible fish kills on the east side of our state here in Florida. And, it's horrible. It's such a beautiful area and such a tragedy to see all that destruction.
I mean, this is the paradox that we face, when we want cheap food and we want, easy production practices, and we listen to corporate players who tell us, oh, let's just plant these specific types of genetically altered seeds and let's then spray them with these type of chemicals, and we get farm policy that promotes these particular practices of monocropping certain, patented seeds and chemicals. But what happens is, you have this excessive use, and we have our water polluted, we have our soil, our air, we're losing birds, we're losing insects, we're losing people. There's a real devastation going on now tied to agrochemical use, not just this isn't just glyphosate by any means, but it is the, poster child, if you will, I think, for the very big problem that we face with a pesticide dependent food
Yeah,
system.
it's not just Monsanto, it's ADM and many, many other companies. And when I ran for governor as a libertarian of Iowa in 2002, and I was running against Tom Vilsack. And
that's a losing battle, isn't it?
Oh yeah, of course. But, I just wanted to get the word out, and just get knowledge and, have an opportunity to speak about what I believed. And I actually have an environmental background as well. So I just felt there were a lot more freedom-based solutions that would work rather than, what was happening with corporate America. I love Robert Kennedy's quote. He said, the biggest polluter in the United States is the US government. And we trust them to protect our environment. That's one of my favorite quotes. It's in my books. Yeah. But anyway, Tom Vilsack was named the governor, biotech governor of the year that year in 2002. And then, of course, he's Secretary of Agriculture. I can't remember under who. I guess it was Carter or
Obama, wasn't he? And then
Obama, and now he's
now again.
Secretary of Agriculture again.
Yeah.
And this is a guy that was the biotech governor of the year. So you see that even all the way he's the head of the agriculture department in the U.S. government, and he's very, very closely tied to these biotech companies. So,
and of course, there are many examples of that,
right.
with many federal agencies of people who are very closely tied to the industries that they're supposed to be overseeing and regulating.
I think what probably more than anything else in our government people need to realize is that these government agencies, whether it's the FDA or CDC, any of them, they're not there to protect us. They're there to protect the companies that they're supposed to be regulating. I mean, that's been the clear message as far as, what I've learned in the last 30, 40 years. It's unfortunate that people actually think that they're going to help them, because it's not the way that the system is working. And that's something we have to change. Don't you agree?
It's not the way the system is working. I think it is. I think they are there. They are supposed to be protecting the public. They are supposed to be.
They're supposed to be.
But there are so many influences, so much corporate money and political influence, and they're really. I don't ever want to, I guess, paint everybody with the same brush, because I've run across so many good scientists within these agencies. And
that's true. I'm glad
one
you're
of them, one just reached out to me on LinkedIn not too long ago and said, "Hey, I've retired finally from the USDA. I never could really talk to you while I was at USDA because I would get fired if I told you truthful things. But now that I'm retired, I can talk to you." And I thought, that's great, but it's also really sad and really wrong that our government scientists feel censored from saying, truthful things and talking to journalists about science and health policy matters. But you hear that over and over and over again.
And I agree with you. The scientists are usually not the ones. It's the politicians that get put in that make the decisions, like with the approval of the GMO. The scientists were clearly in the papers that came out and all the documents. The scientists clearly did not want the GMO foods approved as the same as other food. They clearly saw that, unanimous, but they just went ahead and did it anyway. So that's what we're facing. So this is great. I'm so happy you're doing what you're doing. I hope you keep doing it. I think they should at least have a partial role for you in the movie, because there's no doubt in my mind that this story is going to be turned into a movie. I mean, it's got all the characteristics, right? I mean, you've got Monsanto, the most, what most people consider the poster child for the most evil company in the world. You've got all these characters and the attorneys that are real life characters, and they are characters. And you've got Lee, who is this amazing man who's had a rough life, finally getting his act together, has this job in the school, has a family, everything's going well, and he's destroyed.
Yeah, and that was the biggest thing. He wanted to be there for his boys. He didn't want them to grow up without a father. He intended to be there, and then he's told that he's going to die in 18 months, and it just was devastating to him. But as I said, he's still hanging in there. So.
Wow, that's fantastic. That he's still alive. So what can people do to find your book? Where do they go?
Island Press is the publisher. You can always go on their website, but it's available wherever people buy books, Amazon. And Barnes and Noble and independent booksellers, and my website, I guess.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sending me the copy. I can't wait to read it. And I hope it is turned into a movie, because it's a story that needs to be told. And thank you so much for what you do. And are you planning on continuing in this vein?
Oh, Lord. I've been asked to consider writing another book about another company and another issue in chemical. I'm done with books about Monsanto, I think.
I would say
plenty.
Time to move on.
Time to move on.
Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure everybody who's listening today will be very, very, very encouraged about what you've done here in terms of exposing this kind of corruption, because that's what you've done. You've exposed this kind of corruption that goes on all the time, and we've got to fix that system.
We do. We really do. Too many people are dying from cancer. Too many people are suffering from other health harms, reproductive problems. Too many birds and insects are disappearing. I mean, we need to clean up our act and clean up our world.
We really do. We really do. Again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.